All right. Sorry about that taking so long. I gotta see something real quick. I still didn't. Whatever. All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, like I said, apologies. My computer just decided to completely crap out. So we're like 15 minutes late, but it is time for the dude to do music. All right, so I'm pretty much just gonna be writing for like an hour and a half. I'll look at chat, and if people want to type out stuff and ask me questions or contribute or anything like that. Hello there. Ooh. Hello there, Mr. Gutty. Fantastic name. Reminds me of Mr. Meat. Yeah, I almost feel like I should yeah. Okay. If you ever want to kill me, throw popcorn against the wind for your dog to find entertaining, for you frustrating. When I kill time through, okay. I'll keep that in mind. All right. CJ Kalendick, out of your random curiosity, have you ever seen Dragon Ball Z Abridged? Yes, I have, and it is hilarious. Lord have mercy. I think that came out when I was in high school. It's been a very long time. I didn't watch all of it because it's just way too much. And honestly, I know some people think that Dragon Ball Z Abridged is literally better than Dragon Ball Z. So yeah. I watched a few abridged series when I was younger. Never like stuck with them, but I know Team 4 Star is like the gold standard for abridged. Okay, what do I have for? Okay. I'm gonna turn the air on real quick. I'll be right back. I'm brainstorming right now, trying to figure out a way. The only thing that I'm missing from here is how this character is going to get back to the priestess. something witty entertainment is almost as good as Team 4-Star in terms of making abridged shows. They made a Sword Art Online abridged and are working. Oh, wow, okay. I'll have to give them a look. Okay. Okay. It was you who farted, Derek. It is. It's always you. Oh wait, you guys couldn't see me. I guess that'd be better if I actually showed myself on camera. All right. Hello, Golden Age. Has anyone ever asked you what the end of a movie was because they couldn't endure the suspense? Like for me to intuit the end of a movie? No. I have never gotten a person like, of course, like if I have seen the movie, people have asked me for spoilers. But like to intuit a movie, I've done it correctly on my own, but I would never like, I don't know. Well, I guess if a person asked me, but no, it's never happened. I've never had to like foresee a movie ending for somebody. Now, if you literally mean like if I know what the spoilers of the movie are, then yeah, I've had that happen. But I refuse to tell people. I don't like giving spoilers. Yeah, go ahead. I can answer a few questions about writing character. Currently working on a fantasy adventure, have the characters and struggle with the plot. Any tips? Well, yeah, so like coming up with characters is super easy because like think of the characters as the tools, but think of the plot and the narrative as the job. So like, yeah, it's super easy to go and like buy tools. You can like have your tools. That doesn't mean anything. It's the job you have to do with those tools, right? So you have to come up with like, what's your theme? What's your message? How are you going to utilize the tools? How are you going to put the characters in place? Like, how are all these characters and these pieces that you created for yourself, how are they going to come together to be able to like create a story, right? So really think about like what's ultimately at the core of your story should be like, what's the message that I want to tell, right? Like, why am I telling this story in the first place? And then from there, creating a set of events that explicate that thing you want. That's like where the plot really comes from. I'm pretty new to live stream. Can I ask for a brief synopsis of what you're working on? I don't want to be that annoying guy. No, you're fine. Basically chat had given me as kind of like an editing example, like a little live test, these like random like pieces of a story, these 10 pieces, and I basically am writing all these and trying to make them a cohesive story. So I'll put these here so we can see them. The fact that hello, Flip Out. I've noticed a lot of action movies, particularly in the 90s, that seem to peak at a certain point and the rest of it's underwhelming. You ever felt that too? You mean like in the movies themselves that they peak and then they go downhill, or do you mean the genre itself has gone downhill since the 90s? No problem, Derek. I know you're very flatulent. We all are. In the movie they seem to peak and the rest of the movie becomes underwhelming. Oh yeah. So like a lot of action movies, I mean just a lot of movies period, but action movies specifically will have a climax. And I mean, so this is with like narratives, just kind of like in general, narratives will have a climax and then they will have like a come down from the climax, right? So it's and that's where like your resolution is. And in well-constructed narratives, you're going to have a very short amount of time, usually after your climax. You need to watch Fast Five, Brittany. I keep telling you this. Everybody should watch Fast Five, but the reason that usually resolutions are so short, which is everything after the climax, is because there is nothing for the characters to do anymore, right? The conflict has been solved. The greatest obstacle has been overcome. And because of that, like the interest in the plot is kind of like has been taken away like organically from the watcher, right? But what happens sometimes in like action movies is that action movies are predicated and built around scenes of action. And then they have to deal with the consequences of the action kind of like after the action set piece, but the plot was almost like tied to that action set piece. Like imagine if, like a good example I think is like if for Revenge of the Sith, right? If y'all know episode 3 Star Wars, if like the battle on Mustafar, so there's a point obviously where, you know, you have the high ground and Anakin gets slashed and he's rolling down into the lava. And then you have the scene with him screaming with Obi-Wan, and then he becomes Darth Vader. And then the Jedi go into hiding, right? There's like probably like 10 or 15 minutes of like come down. But it's relatively short in the grand scheme of like the entire movie. Imagine if that was like 45 minutes. And imagine if Anakin's like struggle after the conflict was somehow also related to the plot. And imagine if like the plot itself was based in Obi-Wan overcoming like Anakin, which I guess technically it is, but it's so much bigger, obviously. What can happen is if you don't pace out your stories correctly, you can have, you know, your big action sequence be the thing that draws in people, but the story itself isn't drawing in people. And then after your action sequence, if you have like 30 more minutes of story, but nobody cares about your story because all the things that you've done is basically as an excuse to have people be interested in spectacle, well, then it's like downhill from there. Like once the spectacle is done and once the consumer of the fiction, whatever it is, expects no more spectacle, then like if you don't have a story to back it up, then like, yeah, then it can like seem like there's nothing of interest, right? So like a lot of action movies don't necessarily have like, well, I'm gonna say some action movies don't necessarily have like super deep characters, because like the idea would be you're not going there for like a character driven story, you're going there for like an action driven story. And because the characters are the only thing left after some action has happened, sometimes it can feel pretty underwhelming. Well, so CJ, oh my gosh, yeah, so Juan, I have watched Tremors, but it was a very long time ago. Hey Donald, I'm at work. I just wanted to say hi now rather than being there for the last 2 minutes as I'm continuing to write my screenplay to vent my frustrations with Hollywood. And CJ, I wasn't talking about peaking at the climax, I'm talking about peaking even before that, like peak before the third act. So again, what you're talking about, I think, is the difference in that. So Act 2, a lot of Act 2s is putting the characters in like their lowest point. That's why the middle entries of trilogies usually are the darkest, because it ends with the characters needing to be at their lowest point so that there's the greatest stakes in the third act, which is the third entry of a trilogy. Now, again, some stories, if they're told in 3 acts, don't know how to live up to the consequences that were present in the second act, which means that their third act can kind of seem like lackluster. Right, because if we're talking about like action adventure, usually the end of the second act, if we're talking about characters at their lowest point, the villain usually has done like their big master plan and has thwarted the heroes. Did someone say stakes? Maybe. And if that's the case, then like we've seen the villain at their most competent, we've seen the heroes at their most vulnerable. And then now in the third act would be switched around, like the heroes take the advantage and the once super competent villain who's had everything, you know, the revelations of what, you know, they want, and that their mystery is kind of gone. And now it is just the good guys winning, which sometimes isn't as fulfilling as like, again, the first and second act where you're like, what do the villains want? How are they going to get it? What vulnerabilities are they going to elicit from our main characters? And again, if you don't have good characters to go along with like your third act, sometimes you're not even gonna care about like the things that happen in there. So, I mean, there's like a whole bunch of stuff. This is a very broad and general question, but sometimes there's like just like a whole bunch of things that contribute to like a lackluster third act in general with action oriented. Sometimes people don't care about your action either. If it's not like pretty enough or like well choreographed enough, it's like, you know, it can be kind of weird. Writing can be a pretty intimate activity, so I'm amazed you can do this as a live stream. Are you just used to critique and feedback as an editor that you're totally fine doing this? Yeah, like I have been writing, like, I used to share all my stuff when I was way worse than this. And obviously I haven't written too much yet, but like, I don't know, I feel like even though writing is still very intimate to me and there's supposed to be a lot of vulnerability, I feel like confidence in writing allows you to be able to do something like this, right? I don't fear anything any of you will say about my writing. I take it into consideration, right? Like if someone's like, oh, I think this might work better, or I think this doesn't work for me, I can think like, oh, okay, well, how can I agree with that? How can I do this? But like, I'm not insecure about anything that I'll do here. And that has nothing to do with my, I think, skill level in writing. Sure, that helps. But I think it has to do with like me knowing that like anything that someone could say critically will only make me better. And I think that helps me a lot with being able to work in front of people. How do you think a fantasy book driven by an alternate mythology would do in today's market? A ground up created world where characters die constantly because generations pass constantly. I mean, anything can work. If you're asking me about like market research and stuff, that's a bit strange because I don't know, man, like stories are weird and like book selling is like weird. And I'm not necessarily completely caught up as far as like market wise on the things that are doing like super well. But at the same time, so much of like stories in general is like driven by social media. Now, if you're asking me like, you know, it and what you're talking about here completely dependent upon like the age group that you're working in. A middle grade fiction is going to read completely differently than like a YA fiction, which is going to read completely differently than like a young adult or a an adult fiction, right? So like I can't give like a forecast about like what will or will not sell, because honest to God, so much of it is just random. Like Harry Potter being the best selling franchise of all time has nothing to do with its quality. Like it's still, I guess, like a good obviously it's a good franchise or else it wouldn't have sold the way it did as far as like marketability and being able to be invested into, but it's not the best written franchise of all time. It's not even close, right? I personally just can't read Dune, and Dune is a foundational kind of like American science fiction. So publishing has always been like this. Publishing is lightning in a bottle, marketing happened to be in the right time, right place. So yeah, the minute. Geronimo, I mean, just think of how the Ninja Turtles was able to be so successful. How the heck did that happen? Yeah, I mean, stuff is super weird. Stuff is, you know, there's tons of comic book stories. Well, I guess not as famous now that were wildly successful in their time that are ridiculously weird now. Nicholas, in the last Intentionally Blank podcast, they mentioned how Dracula wasn't the bestseller when it came out, but it's still selling today in comparison with the bestseller at the time. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of stuff. Like it's some stuff is made evergreen, right? Which means it becomes part of the culture of the society, and that's like, of course, like the ultimate type of writing experience that someone could have. I think Harry Potter and Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings are going to be a part of like the zeitgeist of Western culture as far as like storytelling, and there's a few other stories in there as well that become like evergreen, that will constantly always sell because, again, like foundational, like, you know, Catcher in the Rye and like Huckleberry Finn, stuff like that. And then there are stories that like are a flash in the pan, you know, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. You know, I would think that, you know, Hunger Games isn't necessarily a part of like the culture, but it definitely was a flash in the pan. And I think it's still spawning fiction that is people are finding themselves immersed in, but it's not necessarily, I think, like embedded in how we think about storytelling in any way. I might go ahead and change this later. Actually, my margins right? Pretty sure my margins are right. Yeah, my margin's right. What do you think makes something foundational? Is it because the work is true to the author or true to the time? Well, okay, it depends like what you mean by foundational, or like how something gets foundational. If you mean like how does a writer go about writing something that they feel will be foundational, I don't have an answer for that. You know, like I think a lot of writers have no consideration of what that is. If you're talking about like how does a work once written becomes a foundational part of like culture, that is a completely random thing. It's like a confluence of like events. If we want to talk about, you know, like one of the things that I know specifically was obviously Game of Thrones, right? So if we want to talk about that very briefly, and this isn't just a Game of Thrones things, actually, it's there are aspects about a missing part of the culture that a fiction could fill in that place of, right? So if we do talk about Game of Thrones specifically, fantasy for decades had been seen as way more of a child teenage based medium for storytelling, and adults were not thought to actively participate in fantasy in any large scale way. And because of that pervasive thinking, adults started writing fantasy that didn't even try to cater to other adults. They catered it towards children, right? So it's kind of like a cyclical thing. George R. Martin and many other authors attempted to be able to bridge that gap between fantasy and adulthood. And George R. Martin specifically wrote a adult fantasy because he thought that fantasy allowed an excellent amount of allegorical opportunities to be able to tell stories that related to adults and to adult-centered things like politics, climate change, war, civil rights, that kind of stuff. He started writing these books in like the 90s. And just to give you like an idea of like how just like whimsical the whole landscape of publishing is, and just like culture, they didn't really even start getting like big. I mean, he was already kind of like a celebrated author. You know, he'd won awards and he'd been writing in TV, but George R. Martin wasn't like anywhere near a household name. I mean, he wasn't even a household name when his own book started getting famous. HBO. So this is the confluence of events, right? So he wrote his fantasy books for adults. HBO then wanted to start doing like expanding their TV presence, right? So they were taking risks on other TV shows, and one of the things that they wanted to do was create kind of like aside from like Boardwalk Empire, and then they had The Wire, but they wanted to be able to do like continuous kind of like long-term projects. And so they made a deal with George R. Martin. He's like, hey, we can adapt your fantasy. And George R. Martin, one of the things that he wanted, he was having worked in TV before, he made his work adaptable, at least in part. Some of the things weren't obviously done one-to-one. And because HBO had the capacity to be able to throw money at the project, we got Game of Thrones that came out in 2011. By this point in time, George R. Martin had already written 5 books. And the TV show came out and it was marketed towards adults, but it had similarities to already established fictions that were adult oriented, right? They gave legitimacy to why adults would need to even be interested, right? So a lot of, obviously, the same cast for different HBO shows, for just different shows in general, were a part of Game of Thrones, right? So a lot of the cast members of Rome, which I believe was also an HBO show, was on Game of Thrones. Sean Bean gave a ton of credibility to that show. Charles Dance gave a ton of credibility to the show. And Game of Thrones did not market itself really as fantasy when it came out. It marketed itself as a political drama. And I think that was the difference. And by the time people got hooked because of, let's be honest, the boobs and the violence and the political drama, and then the promise of fantasy on the horizon, which were the dragons, which came in season 1, adults started going like, hey, this is new, this is cool, you know, like, this isn't just orcs and whatnot, this is real consequences, it's very well written. And then HBO slowly started to be able to, and again, like, these are generationally good books, like, this isn't just like happens to be a guy who wrote books that got famous. Like Game of Thrones, a lot of people say like, oh gosh, it's I think it's either the second or the third book, like, is one of the best fantasy books of all time, the one with the red wedding in it, because it's a Game of Thrones, a Sword of Storms, I think a Feast for Crows, I can't remember that, I used to be able to know them, but regardless, basically Game of Thrones as a show empowered HBO to have more money to throw at Game of Thrones as a show. This then made adults think, I can read fantasy fiction, and then they bought the books, which upped George R. R. Martin's status as a creative, which then drew more attention to Game of Thrones as a show, right? So it was basically cyclical. And at that time, we were still in, I literally just made a video about this, we were in like a kind of a golden age of television, and watching television was like a huge part of the Western kind of like cultural zeitgeist. Everybody was watching some type of television. It is nowhere near the same today, at least I don't think so. A Clash of Kings and a Dance with Dragons. Well, Dance with Dragons is the 5th one, so a Clash of Kings has to be the 4th one, if you're saying it's in that order. But, you know, we had Breaking Bad, Walking Dead, Game of Thrones. Oh gosh, I mean, there's just so much television that was happening in the 2010s. I think BoJack Horseman came out like 2014 or something like that. TV was king. Movies slowly became king, but at the time TV was king, which also played into Game of Thrones becoming a part of like the cultural zeitgeist. And then it became, you know, like one of the biggest shows of all time because every episode was like a small movie. And then it had gone on for so long that people who were 16 when it came out ended up being like, you know, again, when the first Game of Thrones season came out in 2011, I was, oh gosh, I was born in 95. So yeah, I was 16. And by the time I was 18, I was in a position to really appreciate Game of Thrones and be able to watch HBO and stuff like that. So I think there was a whole bunch of stuff, but more, the takeaway should be that Game of Thrones filled a hole in the culture that had not been touched yet, and that was adults being able to engage in fantasy. I think the large amount of D&D content that you see right now is honestly responsible, or it has, in thanks to large part to Game of Thrones being as popular as it was, because a lot of adults were ridiculed as young adults who are liking fantasy, and Dungeons and Dragons, Baldur's Gate, Game of Thrones, all these different mediums normalized that in the culture. And made it something that was just almost like cool, and allowed that to be a part of, like, you know, how we even considered fiction, what fiction can or cannot do. Harry Potter was different because, and I'm not going to get into that too much, but Harry Potter basically was like, we are going to create fiction that kids want to read from a young age about kids at a young age, and we're going to have them grow with these kids. And that became wildly successful, right? Because schools could put Harry Potter in their classrooms. And then the movies, obviously being able to visually see everything helped it out as well. Now, Harry Potter was already big before the movies, but the movies, I think, coincided like a cyclical thing, also made everything else quite large as well. So do you agree with the use of allegory in fiction? I don't even know how to begin answering that because I think that you cannot be an author and not agree with allegory. If you know the answer to that question, call every publisher available. They will give you millions exactly. As someone who has never seen Game of Thrones, I like to envision the Red Wedding as a Game of Thrones the Yet to the Dress crossover. I think it's not, but I know that it's not, but I like to think so. Yes, exactly. That's all it is, Brittany. Uh, mm, yeah, no problem, Joseph. I am here to please. Oh boy, I'm going to cheat again. That's a nice name. What's the other name? What's the other name? Itzel. I like Itzel. Thank you, Geronimo. I've literally okay. I ran on a rant like a stream and a half ago, but there are no such thing as baby names. It's just names. A Game of Thrones, a Clash of Kings, a Storm of Swords, a Feast for Crows, and a Dance of Dragons. Okay, thank you. I was born in 97 and I straddle the cusp of generational pulls. For me, something like Andor holds more weight because it has allusions to the Bolshevik Revolution and other events in history. Okay. Also, is that an Invincible? I can't see it. It looks like either Samurai Jack or Invincible, and I know it's one or the other. But for your profile pic, Mr. Gutty, is that Invincible? My favorite story is always the one I am writing. It's because I'm very passionate about the time. Yep. Yeah. I'm not going to. I was going to put. I would try to spell Quetzalcoatlus, and you know what I said? That is a task too bold even for me. Quetzal, Lord, Quetzalcoatl. There we go. Gonna copy this. Gonna move it over here. My profile pic is from anime after the rain. No worries about being a weeb. I'm also a weeb. I made a D&D campaign revolving around delivering a homicidal gecko to like a warlord. I got the idea of looking at the rat hitting its head against the wall really hard, waiting for the subway. All right. Bran, I want to write a massive fanfiction featuring my all-time favorite cartoons. Any tips? I mean, that's a bit broad. How massive? The real weeb was inside of us all along. Also, in the future, just so everyone knows, I might move these streams over from this channel to my second channel. Let me see. Just for algorithm purposes. So if you're not subscribed to the second channel, I would recommend doing that. All the cool tubers are making second channels. Well, I've had my second channel for like 2 years. So if anything, they're following me. All right. If you haven't noticed yet, one of the things that I'm slightly struggling with here is, and this happens with every single story I write, is finding time to create, it's called Savage Freaks Brittany. In fact, I can literally put it here. I'm angry that it's not higher up when I search it. Look how far I have to go. I have to go like 4 down. Who wants to go 4 down? Can I do that? There we go. Go subscribe to that. Check on that because I'm gonna be uploading there. As far as like the streams. I've not seen the new Fallout show, but I really want to. I heard it's really good. Guess I can put it. Hey, bro, love your videos. They really helped me learn about writing and storytelling, even wrote a small book that I'm still quite happy about. Oh, very nice. I'm glad to hear that. Ooh, that's one. Remember to foreshadow the grandma. If you write just one book ever, is it your magnum opus by default? Hey, Lane. I'm like a page into writing this story. But not much. I just been answering questions, going around. Forget writer's block. We might actually be in the impediment if your progress ourselves. I mean, maybe. But I mean, like this one, I didn't think I'd actually get through this whole thing in one stream. Because again, it takes me generally like 2 hours for the most part to write like a page anyway. So like, I might write a little bit of this off stream, might write a little bit of this on stream. Not that big a deal. I think, so I guess to keep you guys like up on my thought process while doing this, the things that I'm struggling with now, and when I say struggling, I don't mean like it's going to be an issue, but the things that like my mind is focusing on as an editor is physical description of main character. Establish the setting in 3D space. Keep the pacing concise, right? So what do I mean by these? Do you find anime to be funny? Some anime is funny. So here it's just like I need to be able to describe the main character physically, because the whole point, well, one of the big things with Zion is that she's a buff grandma, and I've not described the buff grandma. And they defined a space to be able to do that. And this is all like, you know, I could just shove it in there, but I just want to do it organically. And then establish, this is probably the biggest thing, is that I have not actually described the setting yet. So these characters kinda, I mean, I've said there's a cave, but like what you really want to do on like your first page is like make sure that your reader can have a sense of like how to visualize things. So like really, I mean, like I'm kind of pushing it here, but I probably within like, oh no, I want that. Within like the first, this is gonna be annoying. Within the first like few lines, I probably should have something that describes this space that I am in. As both an editor and a writer, how do you balance the two? Do you write as it flows for you and then edit later, or are you always conscious of grammar and syntax? So like grammar and syntax is like a very small part of just like the editing process. I generally don't like if I see something that I like, as far as like that, I fix it. But I almost always edit and write at the same time, but I don't edit to the level of like when I'm in my editing mode, right? So like I'm always thinking here again, I need to be able to describe the 3D space. And I'm trying to find a place that like it fits best for. Because I have my hook here. And then what I want to be able to do is use the dialogue. So if you see here, it's prose, dialogue, prose, dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. So like I'm trying to start out, I have some physical descriptions, but again, not of the main character and not of the physical space. So I don't know if you're here for like the last stuff, but this is like Chosen Ones stuff. So the Chosen Ones is, so I'm also doing my best to try to make sure I fit in as many of these as like possible. And the Chosen Ones is a part of that. I'm very interested in how visual elements in a character represent them and can be used for metaphors, like using to reflect the character's arc. You should always be doing that, by the way. Today was a good writing day for me. Finally got out of my head and got some pages done. Very nice. So Joseph, if you're asking like, you know, what makes her a genius? Why is she more perceptive than the other characters? That's not really something that I have to get into here because her being a genius isn't, I'm not. So here's something that I think might be a nuance to maybe aspiring or like novice writers. I'm not saying she's a genius as the author, right? So I'm not like concretely saying it. I am saying that, let me see, where is it? So this is all from like Ziana's perspective. So this is, I'm writing third person over the shoulder, right? So I mean, it could be a bit more direct if I put Ziana thought the girl's a genius, though a bit too lazy at times, right? But her being described as a genius, sure, in like a perfect setting, we would show don't tell, but like she is not even close to important enough to take time to show her genius nature versus tell it, right? Like it's fine to tell in some spaces if it's small enough. She is, again, I would hope that if I am going to go forward and she's going to be a bigger part of the story, then yeah, I'm going to have to show why she thinks this, why Ziana thinks this way of this character. But as of right now, it's just like, you know, this is just Ziana's thoughts. This is kind of like a nuanced thing. You can kind of feel out how much you have to show and how much you have to tell, how centralized some things are to the narrative, to like the context of the story. And again, I want to keep this to like 1 to 3 pages, so I don't want to put necessarily like too much time and effort into one thing that's not going to make a big deal. Sorry, I'm late to the party, but why are you alternating between dialogue and description? Is this for efficiency reason or does this flow better? Yeah, so here's another thing. So if we're just going to read this, the other chosen ones were either dying or dead. The fact that there were multiple should have been their first clue that things weren't right. So right, so this is my hook. This is what's going to get a person, if they're picking this up for the first time, to be able to be like, whoa, that's interesting. Like, haven't heard that before. And hooks usually come from like mystery, tension, conflict, that kind of stuff. So here it's like the chosen one, the other chosen ones were either dying or dead right off the bat. That's like, a person's going to want to know why that is. And then it's the fact that there were multiple should have been their first clue that things weren't right. That's even more mysterious. But as far as switching between dialogue and prose, here, I want to be able to get into my main characters as fast as possible, because the things that people care about most in stories are not your setting. People do not care. Please don't brochure entry. And when I say brochure entry or brochure intro, it's describing, starting off with like a big description of your setting, whether it be city, woods, underground, whatever it is. People do not care. They really do not care. Don't go into your power system. Don't go into your history. Don't go into the economics. people care about characters and I want characters doing things. So I want to get into my characters as soon as possible, and I want to use the dialogue to be able to build up characters as efficiently as possible, so I don't have to use prose to tell my readers about it. I use my dialogue to be able to show my readers who my characters are, right? So here, it would be best if you put your weapons down and gave up on this. Ziana wiped her bloody blade on the leather of her pants. The short sword of the men in front of her, the short swords of the men in front of her were clean, or don't. The girls need more practice anyway. So this paragraph does a ton of heavy lifting. It's okay, Savage. It's okay, Basil. It is perfectly fine. I am gonna stop in a few minutes though, so you can be here for like the last little bit. This does a ton of heavy lifting because it would be best if you put your weapons down and gave up on this, right? So right off the bat, this shows that whoever character is talking about this is confident in themselves. They're addressing somebody else and they're telling them, give up on this, right? They say put down your weapons, which automatically means the person that they're facing is armed, which means they're in some type of conflict, probably life-threatening. Ziana wiped her bloody blade on the leather of her pants, right? So this tells me, oh, this person has killed someone before, right? And survived, right? And probably just got finished killing. Also, if they're wiping the leather on like the bloody pants, they're on wiping the blood on her leather pants, probably has done it before if she's not freaking out about doing it. And if she's confident in that situation, oh, that means she's probably a practice killer and doesn't care about killing whoever's in front of her. The short sword of the men in front of her were clean. And that tells me these guys haven't killed anybody yet, right? So it's kind of like a power imbalance already, just from these like 3 lines, right? Or don't. The girls need more practice anyway. And here it's just like, okay, now we're also showing a bit of nonchalance on the part of like the main character, right? Since Ziana's like my main character, I wanted her to talk first. If I put or don't, the girls need more practice anyway. Now I get a free introduction into the other main characters who are, well, not even main characters, but other characters who are part of this 3D scene, right? And I'm also showing that she's so confident. She actually doesn't even care if these guys live or die. And her mind is on the girls needing more practice, right? And if the girls need more practice, if she's evaluating that, that means that this character already is kind of like mastering these skills. And she's completely unthreatened. Mr. Gutty, thanks for the 10 bucks. I find the hardest thing in writing is subtlety. How do you find the right balance between show versus tell? And then whichever you choose, it has to be organic. Where do you draw the line? That is very difficult. So that just comes with like, I think, writing a lot. I know it's kind of a cop out, but it really does take a while to be able to figure out like what things are like important for you to be able to focus on. When we talk about like show don't tell, it's not like a ones and zeros, like always during this, never during that. It is very much kind of like a feel. Now, granted, of course, there are some times when like you absolutely should show because you want to give evidence to claims that are important for your reader to like know based upon like their relevancy to the plot. You don't want to just say like this character was a genius and then everybody else regards them as a genius and then they never do anything genius throughout the entire narrative, but they get all the perks and benefits of a character who would be a genius. You have to demonstrate, again, if it's a huge part of the story, demonstrate where their genius nature comes from and why they're regarded like that. If a character is constantly doing non-genius things but is referred to as a genius, you're gonna make your reader feel like insulted. Here, again, it doesn't really matter that much because like my character's not that important. This is just kind of a side character. But that's where like, I think if you're talking about showing them show versus telling, it's a lot of feel, right? As far as subtlety, that again is a complete feel thing because there are things that I've written that I think are just way too subtle that people get instantly, and things that I've written that are like really, really obvious that people don't pick up. So but yeah, all of you who are commenting are pretty correct on all this. So like, that's what I wanted Ziana to come off as. And here I'm able to give like all of that info about the character just in these few lines, right? So I've already done a lot of characterization. I mean, really, it's just these ones through the dialogue and then through the prose, right? And so here I transition into the next few lines. It's Behind Ziana were her granddaughters, at least the ones who'd made it this far. The rest were back in the maze of the cave, fending off the other novice treasure hunters that believed themselves to be chosen by the gods. So here this is more of just kind of like handiwork or due diligence, because Ziana is like, she has a ton. We've already decided that she has a ton of granddaughters, or at least family members. So like they all can't be here because, again, I'm not trying to write a scene with like 15 people in it. I really only have like her and 2 other granddaughters here, and then the rest are like off somewhere else, right? And so the idea would be, oh, by doing this, we get to see like how big the group actually is without the difficulty of needing to write it. And then I establish a little bit of the 3D scene here, right? So because this section right here tells us nothing about the 3-dimensional space. It tells us like Ziana is here and some men are across from her. At least now we know that there's a cave system. I still need to add in more like 3-dimensional guide here though. But here, see, the other thing that I'm doing here is I'm talking about, or don't the girls need more practice. This dialogue gives me free reign to then introduce prose about the granddaughters. This then gives me free reign to introduce the dialogue of the granddaughters. So he's splitting them up, or can I take all 3 of them? Arandi, the granddaughter with the hottest head and the smallest frame, flipped a dagger in her hand, right? And I wanted to show why this character would say something like this, so I made her kind of hot-headed. The 2 in the back have chattering ankles. It might not even be fair to make them fight at one at a time. Do we really care about fair at this point? Itzel rolled her eyes. She was tall, dark-haired, and holding a spear dripping in poison. Right, let's just get this over with. So here, the only reason I decided this was because if I ever have like a really like hot-headed, fiery character, maybe I'll do the opposite, who is kind of like more methodical, right? But it just flows really well. And again, this type of thing isn't like an all or nothing type deal. This isn't going to always happen. Sometimes you're just going to have like here, like a lot of dialogue back to back to back to back. Sometimes you're going to have a whole page of prose. It is a lot of a feel thing, but one of the things that I like to do, especially at an early part of the story, when I have, this is going to be one of the hardest sections for like you to write just in general, is like the start of your story, because you have so much to do in so little space. But haven't you seen how smart Sansa is? Exactly. Yeah. That's he's strolled in covered in blood and gut smoking, axe covered in blood. You have 2 options. You can either drop your weapons or I can finish up here. It doesn't matter to me either. He's yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar to that. So yeah, so what I want to do here is, again, I can actually sneak in, because we're only, what is this? How many words is this? Yeah, we're like 300 words in, which is basically like a page-ish. I probably have like another 100 some odd words to go for like 1 page. But I can sneak in her physical description down here, because we're still pretty new to all the characters. The setting though, I should put up here. Okay, I'm actually going to put the setting here, because, and the reason I'm choosing to put the setting here, we are the chosen, the chosen of the dragon god Quetzalcoatl. The man in front shouted out his words, brow furrowed, eyes worried, hand shaking on his axe. Here, since I've already moved away, I'm using prose to give a physical description of the character. It would be appropriate for me to also use this time to give a physical description of the environment as well, right? Because I'm not in the position where the thing he's saying next is like directly linked to this. Like, the reason I'm not going to do it over here is because if she says like the 2 in the back have chattering ankles, it might not even be fair to make them fight one at a time. If I was to put a big description of prose here, then a reader might not remember this sentence, and then having it follow up, do we really need to care about fair at this point? A reader might go, why is she talking about fairness? Right? But if this talk about fairness is directly following this, then that's a lot more cogent, right? That's a lot more easy to recognize. So I don't want to break this up with any prose. I want to put the prose somewhere where it's not going to get in the way of the dialogue. And here, if my prose are breaking up dialogue, the dialogue still functions correctly, right? If I talk about the environment and then it finishes off with the high priestess has adorned us as the saviors of our people, said the treasure hunter. The response from Ziana is only to this. It's not going to be affected by this, right? So that's a way that I think about where to add in like the beginning part. It's and for some readers, they're not going to care. They're just not going to care. They're not going to notice the amount of effort you put in. All they're going to care about is like whether or not it's involved. A lot of this comes from the fact that like 80% of readers are probably not going to care, but then there are the 20% of readers that do. And that's what separates good and great books from okay books. It's the books and the stories that can capture like the multiplicity, the fullness of the base of people that can read it or interact with it versus just like the lowest common denominator. In front of its X. And the 80% won't ding you for doing a better job. Exactly. He and his companions stood on a rocky bridge. Heading over the dark chasm, the cave. This part of the cave had opened up to be like a great dome, and in its center was a temple, was a grand what is a synonym for plain? This is literally what I do when I'm looking for words, by the way. Synonym for unadorned It's probably not gonna do anything for me. Unembellished. Okay, that could work. Unvarnished. And okay, yeah, stern and unembellished could be fine. The temple glowing with lantern light and brazier flames. Stern and embellished. The man on this bridge. Where go last? Obstacle. Keeping. Isn't the synonym of plane aircraft? I'm of the 1% that only characters guess yes, I know. Do you have opinion on architectural versus gardener writers in general? Personally, I believe good writers should be both to some degree, but this seems to be a raging argument amongst my friends. I mean, it's a raging argument against just like writers in general. I am a person that cannot possibly write without doing an outline. I'm an architect. I see the value in gardening on the spot because I think you will only ever have your most genuine ideas for a character while you're in that character's shoes. Right? So like I can think about how my character would react to something, but until I'm writing that character and embodying them in the POV, I can't know. And you have to give yourself the freedom to be able to manipulate your outline, to be able to, you know, sometimes your characters surprise you and you don't know. But like for me, just as an editor, and I'm a bit biased here, it is very much I have to plan everything, like, or most things. I can't just kind of like do things willy-nilly. So, but yeah, thank you guys. We got like about a page-ish done. This will probably end up being 4 pages. I'll probably work on it a little off stream because I'll be back Sunday. But thank you all for being here. Thanks for the donations. It's 8 o'clock. And I will see y'all later.